from the shores of beautiful Lake Coeur d'Alene in the heart of North Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discuss their topics on our forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum. With your host and moderator, political scientist, Tony Stewart.
I welcome you to the 7th week of our special series titled Journey Through Time, What Happened in the Western World in the Second Millennium. On our first 6 programs, we've had famous people from throughout the world on our program, and today we're going to continue that. And in this case, we have 3 famous people in history. But before I introduce them, I must thank the Idaho Humanities Council for a special grant that they gave us for this series, along with the Associated Students of North Idaho College and the North Idaho College Foundation. Let us get into today's exciting program. Our first guest is a man who was named Herr Rich. He was the first newspaper publisher that we know of in recorded history in the mid-1600s in Germany. Herr Rich, welcome to our program. We look forward to you telling us how the newspaper business got started.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate being asked.
So good to have you come in 1999 and tell us what happened in the mid-1600s. And next to that famous person is Madame Marie Curie, who was a very famous French chemist, and she lived from 1867 to 1934. Madame Curie, welcome to our program. We're delighted to have you here and excited to know about your contributions to humankind.
Thank you. It's a nice break from the laboratory.
Yes, and to come into another time and to see what life is like in 1999. And our third guest is Henry Ford, who lived from 1863 to 1947 and was certainly the best-known manufacturer of automobiles and known for the Model T. Mr. Ford, welcome to our time here in 1999.
Thank you, Tony. I enjoyed traveling down on fine roads today.
Well, so, due to you, we have a lot of things we've had to do in that area in transportation. And we have our 2 regular panelists, Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Schenck, who is the Vice President of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and Janelle Burke will commence today's questioning.
Each of you were very famous, even in your own time. I would like to ask a question of each one of you, and we're going to start in order of time. Herr Rich, you were the person who lived first in history. When did you live, and what was your contribution?
Well, I lived in the mid-1600s in Saxony, Germany, and my major contribution was that I was the publisher and everything else that has to do with it of the world's first known daily newspaper.
And you lived in Germany, and how large was your town that you were going to, or do you know at that time? Did you have a large distribution is what I'm trying to ask.
Good. That's a good question. I think that Leipzig was probably the major city in Germany of Saxony, the state of Saxony at that time. I really am not sure of the size, but it was the major city of Germany. And my distribution or my circulation actually was probably, I think, about 20 newspapers a day. But my trick is that I charged an exorbitant price for each paper.
And Madame Curie, what was your major contribution?
Probably the most famous contribution, all the stuff of radioactivity, but the exciting things was unlocking the theories and the energies and all of the powers that are there in the nucleus of atomic structure. It's interesting to be here today and to listen to people talk about grand unification theories where we're trying to unify all the forces and energies of the universe, and to know that I started that with unlocking the nuclear forces that people now term radioactivity.
And where was your laboratory located?
Laboratory was in France.
And Mr. Ford, were you the inventor of the automobile?
No, Janelle, I didn't invent the automobile, and I didn't invent the assembly line. Those are myths that are attributed to me. But what I did do was put them together and made the assembly line move, and therefore created very inexpensive automobiles, the ones that common everyday people could afford. People making a good salary could afford my cars. And today, many people drive them because of this.
And where were you located?
Well, I was born in Dearborn, Michigan, outside of Detroit, and then traveled to Detroit, and my career was in that city. And because of my work and other associates that work with me, a great deal of the automobile manufacturing in the country resides now in Detroit.
Steve Sheen.
Hey, Rich, what language was your paper printed in?
It was printed in German.
In the German vernacular. All right. Were the 20 papers a day, was that pretty representative of the market? I mean, could many people read in the mid-1600s?
Actually, very few could read. Just the very wealthy could read. And so what I geared my newspaper toward were the very wealthy travelers and traders of that time. Central Europe had just finished the 30 Years' War, and a great deal of wealth was building. And businessmen were looking for ways to invest their money. And they were coming to Leipzig since it was the big city of the area. And I would simply go to the stagecoach depot and sell my paper to the very rich people that would be traveling by stagecoach.
And when you say that you charged an exorbitant price for the 20 papers you sold, what was that?
I think I probably, if we were to equate it to today's money.
That would be best for our audience. Thank you.
If we could equate it to today's money, I probably charged an equivalent of $20 a newspaper.
And this wasn't, I don't know if you've had a chance to see it in your brief stop here, but this wasn't exactly the New York Times of today, was it?
It was about 9 by 12 and printed on one sheet, one side of the paper.
By the word, that was an exorbitant price. Thank you.
And it was big print. It was type about that big, which was an advantage because very few people had glasses. And so many people were very glad that the print was so big.
Madam Curie, can you tell us a bit about the practical application of your work with atomic structure?
Once you have control of those nuclear energies, then you can use them for, if you can release them in small packets, then you've got nuclear power. If you let them be released all at once, then you have a bomb, something a little more destructive from that standpoint. If you can take trace amounts and let those energies be released in small packets, then a lot of our medicines, a lot of chemotherapies, things of that nature, those are nice applications that I've seen with the radioactivity.
Anything else that's primarily attributed to your work?
X-rays, X-ray cars. During World War I, when we were basically, the laboratory was shut down for a while, and we needed something to do, and women in particular needed something to do. So I got the drawings together, designed. I wasn't actually doing research in X-rays per se at the time, but knew enough to be able to put those together, got the monies together, and basically had X-ray cars to go out into the field so that you could have a team of qualified help at that moment. So kind of maybe what I've seen some lights and stuff, maybe the ambulances and some things I've seen go by since I've been here in this time. And it was great work, and it was a great way for women to contribute to the war effort.
Well, and that's where I was headed. It is the development of the X-ray that you're most well known for in our time. Did you develop the theory behind it, or did you actually pioneer the practical use of X-rays for medical
It was
purposes?
actually the practical use. Rodinger had done the X-ray invention before me, and uranium was the element that was just right before. It was a very exciting time of empirical research, just purely hurrying up to find out as much as you could, because there was going to be another lab and another team, a very select and small group of individuals, but someone was going to figure it out, because we were right at that particular moment of new discoveries of things we had not seen before.
And Mr. Ford, you said you didn't, you invented neither the automobile nor the assembly line process. What led you to believe that those two should be combined and that there was a market for an inexpensive automobile in America after the turn of the century?
Well, my inspiration when I grew up on a farm was that I didn't want to do the farm labor. I was interested in the machinery, and I was interested in taking things apart, and my father wanted me to do the farm labor. And so my real interest was to find a way to relieve the many people who were farming in my time from the back-breaking labor. Once I saw, though, an automobile, and once I read about it, and then once I created my own automobile, I saw the potential for it. And as I traveled through the streets, people were very excited to see that, and I knew that many people would rush to purchase it if we could get the cost of it down, if we could produce it more cheaply.
And did your vision of an automobile that was affordable by the masses, was it realized quickly? Was there a great rush to buy your automobile?
Oh, yes. The Model T, of course, which I'm most known for, was built over a period of 20 years. There's still many in use today. Mm-hmm. And we built 15 million of them between 1908 and 1927. It had an excellent design, the best engineers in that time could put together. And people took to them very quickly. And the price of the early ones were $825. In time, they went down as low as $290 by the mid-1920s. So at that rate, even though they weren't the best automobile made, they were, for the price, the best automobile made.
And if I may, one other quick follow-up, and I hope I'm not asking too technical a question, but prior to this time, approximately how many automobiles were in the hands of Americans? You sold 15 million in a relatively short span.
In 1918, we had half of the automobiles were ones that we had built, and we had built 5 million at that time. So in 1918, there were about 10 million automobiles in the United States.
And prior to your development of again, this application of assembly line technology to automobile manufacture, automobiles were primarily a novelty, something only for the rich?
They were built in bicycle shops, one at a time or in very small quantities, and only the rich could afford them.
Thank you very much.
To our distinguished guests, I'm going to reverse the order so the same one doesn't go first and last all the time. We'll go to you, Mr. Ford. You've indicated in your answers to Mr. Steve Schenck that you fell upon a plan that would create large volume of production at a low rate, and that's where you succeeded. How did you fall upon this plan? And I assume you recruited outstanding engineers. I'd like to take this opportunity. We have someone like all of you that are so creative. What makes you different from others in society? What did you do that was successful that others that were attempting to get in the automobile industry did not understand?
When I was a child, Tony, I took all kinds of machinery apart. And machinery is to a person who's a mechanic the same that the printed material and words are to an author. And you can see things in machinery. One of the things that I took apart was watches. And for a time, I made my living when I was in my late teens as a watchmaker for a portion of it. And if you take a watch apart and you look at the mechanism and you look at how everything works together to get the hand to move, you see the inspiration for a moving assembly line where you can have not all of the parts in a watch run at the same speed. And on a moving assembly line, not all of the assembly lines feeding the final product move at the same speed. And when I built the first great factories of the Industrial Revolution that were huge plants, the River Rouge plant was literally the largest industrial complex at the time. 81,000 people worked there at the height of the River Rouge employment. And it was built so that the lines came together to time any product so that the products just rolled off. We needed to give each worker every second that they needed to produce or make their contribution on the product, but not 1 second more than they needed.
So I hear you saying here that you connect, that you take one particular product like a watch and you were able to transform that into another product, and that's where a lot of people intellectually cannot do that. And I think that's very fascinating. Madam Curie, you won some great honors. First of all with your husband, and then later after his tragic death, you won yourself. Would you tell us a little bit more about that and what caused you to be so honored?
The Nobel Prize in Physics, and then the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. And
Let me interrupt. Are you the only woman to ever win 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different areas?
The first female to win a Nobel Prize, the only female to win 2 Nobel Prizes. Very few individuals have won 2, and also have a daughter who won a Nobel Prize in Chemistry, and that is a first and an only.
Yes. Excuse me, now go ahead and tell me why you were so honored.
I think mostly it was perseverance. I grew up in a household where intellect was very honored and very nurtured from that standpoint. but had to work really hard before I could even get to the university. I think the word that I've heard some of you guys say as I've toured around has been delayed gratification. And I had to send my sister to medical school and work as a governess before I could actually get to the university. But then it was mostly just hard work and staying in the lab long hours, forgetting to eat, those types of things, and really and truly believing that being on that brink and being on the brink of discovery for 4 years, not being on the brink for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. Had to work really hard to make sure my knowledge foundation was all there. When I did get to the university, I found gaps and holes, even though for my time I was very well educated and had to work very hard to fill in those particular gaps and holes. And then the laboratory situation allowed us to surround ourselves, and all of our conversations were on the work and were on the research. So it literally absorbed our entire life.
I hear you saying something that is true in 1999 too, in all fields, be it humanities, sports, politics, what it is. You had a passion for your work.
Very much.
It was first in your life.
Mm-hmm.
I also find it remarkable that you would have such substance and such expertise in two different areas like chemistry and physics. So a parallel passion going on there in study.
And probably the base to all of that was mathematics. And once that mathematical base was there, then the application towards the physics or the application toward the chemistry was really quite easy, depending upon the angle of research and the angle of investigation.
But did you have a number of years of maybe frustration before you had breakthroughs? What's the difference between working so long and then how did you feel when you saw, here it is, here's the answer?
It was beautiful. When we finally isolated the radium and the polonium and you had that isolated, it was just beautiful. But immediately then there were other questions. There was more to do. So once you had that question answered, then immediately there were other things to delve into. So actually the period of time in my life after the Nobel Prize was frustrating from the standpoint of the research was interrupted and there were so many new things to look at. There were newspapermen to talk to and reports and banquets, and all of that stuff was just a great aggravation to getting the research underway.
With that, we'll turn to our newspaper gentleman. You indicated that you only had about 20 newspaper customers and you charged them a lot. You only had one page, and a lot of political leaders would be delighted with you today because they might not make the news. How did you decide, with that limited space you had, with that very large lettering, what was going to make the news? And let me add one other thing. Sure. You confessed this to an audience here on your visit here, I think, is that you didn't every day or every week put actually new news in there, did you? Would you share both those with us?
Oh, you're onto my secret.
Yes.
Yes. I actually technically printed a new paper every day, but often I would only change the date at the top of the paper. And I got away with this because I had brand new customers every day who would not be aware.
Visitors to your city.
Right. They wouldn't be aware of what I had printed the previous day, even if it was the same. My content generally was news that was of interest to travelers, wealthy travelers. So I would talk about different taxes from German state to German state. I would talk about different trades and products that were hot right then. I would run large entertainment pieces that they could read as they were riding in the stagecoach, and many of them were going on to voyages across oceans, and they would take these entertainment pieces to read on their voyages.
Okay, thank you. Janelle Burke.
My question to all three of you is going to be about working conditions, but I'll have specific questions for each of you. Starting with Herr Rich, in your time, as I take it, you were almost a one-man show. Today, newspaper business is a very complex business, but you were sort of a one-man show. You did it all, as I understand. You were the typesetter.
I was the complete business. I wrote the news, I edited the news, I set the type, I printed the paper, and then I sold it.
So you actually did the selling of the paper as well. You marketed yourself.
Right, and the secret of that was that as I would go to the stagecoach depots to sell the paper, I would also gather the news from these wealthy travelers. So one day's gossip led to the next day's news.
And Madam Curie, in terms of working conditions in your time, what was it like to be a woman who was working? Were there many women who were in laboratories at that time?
There were very few women that were in laboratories at that particular time. Towards the end of my time as the supervisor of the laboratory, there became more and more. But conditions were hard. You had to stay with your work. A titration may last 48 hours. You did not leave. You did not carry out food or any of those particular things. Very grueling work, very exhausting work, and then all the papers and the graphs and the data had to be gone on before. You may have to design your equipment because the research at the time was cutting edge, so we may have to design the equipment. The 4 years that Pierre and I did most of the isolation of the radioactive radium was in a shed.
And Pierre was your husband?
Pierre was my husband.
And so it was, and you certainly had to keep records with very limited resources, I would imagine. Your record keeping probably consisted of a pen and a pencil of paper, or a piece of paper.
Yes, and the laboratory notebook was more like a Bible.
Very important. Well, Mr. Ford, I think you had some definite ideas about labor in your time, and it's somewhat different from what we consider labor rights and privileges to be today.
Absolutely. We had a difficult time after assembly lines got going, not only in my business, but in other businesses, attracting workers. And those people who have heard talk about the assembly line would certainly understand that that type of work was difficult for people who had to do it. And we knew that at the time, and we were criticized at the time for the monotony of the assembly line. So in order to, we had terrible attrition rates. People went through and moved on from business to business, and we needed a way to retain these people and retain the training that we did have invested in them. I set upon the idea of paying them a great deal more money for the effort that they were putting forth. And in my time, we paid $2.38 a day for a 9-hour day of work at my company. I wanted more efficiency. I proposed to the board of directors that we would pay $5 for an 8-hour day, and that we would run 3 8-hour shifts per day to get more out of the plant. At first, this was met with skepticism, but before long, those investors said, yes, let's go ahead and do that. We did that. So many people showed up at the gates that it created problems. We had to ask people to leave and then forcibly remove them with fire hoses, as it were, but we were very successful. And it was the greatest cost-cutting move that I ever did, to pay people $5 for an 8-hour day. The dividends were repaid many, many times over. In later years, we had unions that came in the 30s, the United Auto Workers and Walter Reuther, and I opposed that, and I opposed the unionization. I don't feel that unions added to the value of the automobile for the customer or for the investors in the company, and I think that paying your workers fairly is the best way to achieve good results in the factory.
Steve Sheen.
Hey, Rich, you I think used the word hot to describe some of the items of news you put in your newspaper. What were you referring to when you used that term?
Again, our customers were travelers that would go from inn to inn, and they were usually very wealthy males. And what probably was our most popular item was a rating system for prostitutes' services at the different inns along the route. And this was written in very flowery language so that only the wealthy, very literate men would understand what I was talking about. And it was also written that way so that the local constables were not able to understand what I was talking about.
I understand. Madam Curie, you were the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, the only woman to win 2. Were you a celebrated figure, well accepted in the scientific community of your day?
That was very controversial. It got to be an embarrassment for France for me to have 2 Nobel Prizes and still not be a member of the Academy of Science. I did put my name on the docket when an opening came up at one point, and the vote was defeated by 1 vote. And the reason given at the time was that it was difficult to separate my research from my husband's research, but the truth of the matter is the research was always mine, and my husband let go of his research to come and help me with my research.
Thank you. Mr. Ford, you mentioned the Model T. You're absolutely right. Many of them still do exist today. What moved you to diversify the product line? Was it competition, or was it simply advances in technology that brought about additional models of your product?
Well, honestly, Steve, I was loath to put advances in technology in the Model T. That wasn't my goal. My goal was to create a very inexpensive automobile. And my son Edsel tried to do that at one time in the mid-20s, and I rejected it rather vociferously by returning from vacation and pounding dents in the hood of the car and breaking the windshield out on the improved model that he put forth. But after a time, by 1927, and after a 20-year run of that automobile, it was obvious that competitors like the Chevrolet brothers were improving technology, and we needed to do something different. And I think others had more to do with that than I did, but certainly we had to make changes in order to sell our automobiles. It was competition.
The next line was the Model A?
The Model A, the second Model A.
Was it significantly more expensive?
More expensive, but very successful and well received by the public as well.
Thank you.
On that note, we're going to break character, which is an important thing to do in this. I want to introduce the three famous people as who they actually are in 1999. First of all, welcome to the program Niels Rosedal, who is a member of the faculty at North Idaho College, and he is the faculty advisor to the student newspaper, The Sentinel. And Niels, I know you've won many awards through your work, you and your students, and we congratulate you.
Thank you.
Very happy to have you here and play this role. You're very good to do that every year. And our second person we welcome to the program in her real role in life is Renee Cooper, who's also a member of the faculty teaching in the natural sciences and chemistry. And Renee's a former president of the faculty assembly. And Renee, you did a wonderful job, and we thank you very much.
Thanks. It was very enjoyable.
And Steve Ruppel, who's also in charge of our computer system and has also taught some. He has been playing Henry Ford. And Steve, again, you did a great job. And all three of you are extremely talented. And it's this kind of format that enhances learning. And we're getting such reaction from our viewers, and also we're getting that kind of reaction from the students on campus. And we're just delighted you could be here and that you could do this. I wish time would permit me to ask you what it would mean to you personally, but I guess we'll have to be off the air before we do that, because on this program, the clock always wins. And thank you, three famous people in history, for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to be with us again next week at the same time. We'll continue this series. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart. Tell us.
North Idaho College Public Forum is the longest-running public television show of its type in North America and is seen in 7 states and 2 Canadian provinces. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational community outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another new edition of North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.